Fireside Tailes with Wolfgang, Episode 13. Originally broadcast on GWC Productions YouTube channel, CAPS Media Television Channel 6, KPPQ-LP Ventura at 104.1 FM, and on the KPPQ Podcast Network. Greetings and salutations. I'm Hunter Ackerman, here to read some classic literature for you and my beastly feline companion Wolfgang. So Wolfus, what do you want to hear? Next we refill the tea and move to another climate, another part of the world, and another narrator. Another narrator who drinks bourbon. Right before the pandemic. Matter of fact, my last... Wow, this had not occurred to me. Yeah, poor Tobermory. Poor Tobermory met his demise not at the hands of the people who wanted to kill him, but at the fangs of Wolfgang. Yeah, Wolfgang made a cameo, indeed. Wolfgang Beastly. Yeah. So, I was starting to say, my last trip before the pandemic, of course I didn't know it was my last trip. I didn't know a pandemic was definitely coming to upset all our lives. My last trip before the pandemic was up to the San Francisco area. And I was in Oakland. Some know, I wouldn't expect all to, that Jack London was very fond of San Francisco and the whole San Francisco Bay Area. So my last vacation, my last road trip before the pandemic began was literally to Jack London Square. And I did not put that together until about 2.5 minutes ago. That occurred to me. That is actually the case. There is still a bar. There's still a bar in Oakland that you can go to that Jack London drank at that has the last still operating gas lantern fed by like the city's natural gas grid. Of course, the city has all like moved all the public lighting over to electricity, but I think they had something working where gas lighting can be grandfathered in for as long as the folks didn't want to move over to electricity. There is one bar left, and I believe it is appropriately called the Gaslight Bar. And yeah, I was not drinking at the time, so I just went in to sort of soak up the history and look around and kind of be present at like, this is a place that Jack London came and thought about writing and drank, you know, when he wasn't in Alaska, of course. But this is one of those places that he came to organize his notes and thoughts. Wow. So, in addition to his love of the San Francisco Bay Area, Jack London is very much known for his love of Alaska. This is one of my favorite Jack London short stories. It's called That Spot. I don't much think of Stephen McKay anymore, though I used to swear by him. I know that in those days I loved him more than my brother. If ever I met Stephen McKay again, I shall not be responsible for my actions. It passes beyond me that a man with whom I shared food and blanket, and with whom I mushed over the Chillicoot Trail, should turn out the way he did. I always sized up Steve as a square man, a kindly comrade without an iota of anything vindictive or malicious in his nature. I shall never trust my judgment in men again. Why, I nursed that man through typhoid fever. We starved together on the headwaters of the Stewart, and he saved my life on the Little Salmon. And now, after the years we were together, all I can say of Stephen McKay is that he is the meanest man I ever knew. We started for the Klondike in the fall rush of 1897. We started too late to get over Chilkoot Pass before the freeze-up. We packed our outfit on our backs part of the way over when the snow began to fly, and then we had to buy dogs in order to sled the rest of the way. That was how we came to get that spot. Dog prices were high, and we paid $110 for him. He looked worth it. I say looked, because he was one of the finest appearing dogs I ever saw. He weighed 60 pounds, and he had all the lines of a good sled animal. We never could make out what his breed was. He wasn't Husky, nor Malamute, nor Hudson Bay. He looked like all of them, and he didn't look like any of them. And on top of all of it, he had some of the white man's dog in him. For on one side, in the thick of the mixed yellow, brown, red, and dirty white that was his prevailing color, there was a spot of coal black, as big as a water bucket. That was why we called him Spot. He was a good looker, all right. When he was in condition, his muscles stood out in bunches all over him. He was the strongest looking brute I ever saw in Alaska. Also, the most intelligent looking. To run your eyes over him, you'd think he could outpull 3 dogs at his own weight. Maybe he could, but I never saw it. His intelligence didn't run that way. He could steal and forage to perfection. He had an instinct that was positively gruesome for divining when work was to be done and for making a sneak accordingly. And for getting lost and not staying lost, he was nothing short of inspired. But when it came to work, the way that intelligence dribbled out of him and left a mere clot of wobbling, stupid jelly would make your heart bleed. There were times I reflect, I think it wasn't stupidity. Maybe, like some men I know, he was maybe too wise to work. I shouldn't wonder if he put it all over us with that intelligence of his. Maybe he figured it all out and decided that a licking now and again was no work. Maybe he decided a licking now and again plus no work was a whole lot better than work all the time and no licking. I'm telling you, he was intelligent enough for such a computation. I sat and looked into that dog's eyes till the shivers ran up and down my spine and the marrow crawled like yeast with all the intelligence I saw shining out of that dog. I can't express myself enough about that intelligence. It's beyond mere words. I saw it. That's all. At times, it was like gazing into a human soul to look into his eyes. And what I saw there frightened me and started all sorts of ideas in my own mind of reincarnation and all the rest. I tell you, I was sensed something big in that brute's eyes. There was a message there, but I wasn't big enough myself to catch it. Whatever it was, and I know I'm making a fool of myself here, whatever it was, it baffled me. I can't give an inkling of what I saw in that brute's eyes. It wasn't light. It wasn't color. It wasn't nothing I could put my finger on. It was something that moved way back when the eyes themselves weren't moving. And I guess I didn't see it move either. I only sensed that it moved. It was an expression. That's what it was. And I got an impression of it. Nah, it was different from a mere expression. It was more than that. I don't know what it was, but it gave me a feeling of kinship just the same. Oh no, not sentimental kinship. It was rather a kinship of equality. Those eyes never pleaded like a deer's eyes. They challenged. Now, it wasn't defiance. It was just a calm assumption of equality. And I don't think it was deliberate. My belief is that it was unconscious on his part. It was there because it was there, and it couldn't help shining out. Now, I don't mean shine, it didn't shine, it moved. I know I'm talking rot, but if you'd looked into that animal's eyes the way I have, you'd understand. Steve was affected the same way I was. Why, I tried to kill that Spot once. He was no good for anything, and I fell down on it. I led him out into the brush, and he came along slow and unwilling. He knew what was going on. I stopped in a likely place, put my foot on the rope, pulled my big Colt 45, and that dog sat down and looked at me. I tell you, he didn't plead. He just looked. And I saw all kinds of incomprehensible things moving. Yeah, moving in those eyes of his. I didn't really see them move. I thought I saw them, for, as I said before, I guess I only sensed them. And I want to tell you right now that it got beyond me. It was like killing a man, a conscious, brave man who looked calmly into your gun, as much to say, "Who's afraid?" Then, too, the message seemed so near that instead of pulling the trigger quick, I stopped to see if I could catch the message. There it was, right before me, glimmering all around in those eyes of his. And then it was too late. I got scared. I was trembly all over, and my stomach generated a nervous palpitation that made me seasick. I just sat down and looked at that dog, and he looked at me till I thought I was going crazy. You want to know what I did? I threw down the gun. I ran back to the camp with the fear of God in my heart. Steve laughed at me, but I noticed that Steve led Spot into the woods a week later for the same purpose, and that Steve came back alone, and a little later, Spot drifted back too. At any rate, Spot wouldn't work. We paid $110 for him from the bottom of our sack, and he wouldn't work. He wouldn't even tighten the traces. Steve spoke to him the first time we put him in harness, and he sort of shivered. That was all. Not an ounce on the traces. He just stood still and wobbled like so much jelly. Steve touched him with the whip. He yelped, but not an ounce. Steve touched him again, a bit harder, and he howled. The regular howl, regular long wolf howl. Then Steve got mad and gave him half a dozen, and I came on the run from the tent. I told Steve he was brutal with the animal, and we had some words, the first we ever had. He threw the whip down in the snow, and he walked away mad. Well, I picked it up, and I went to it. That spot trembled and wobbled and cowered before I ever swung the lash, and with the first bite of it, he howled like a lost soul. Next, he lay down in the snow. I started the rest of the dogs, and they dragged him along while I threw the whip into him. He rolled over on his back and bumped along, his 4 feet waving in the air, himself howling as though he was going through a sausage machine. Steve came back and laughed at me, and I apologized for what I'd said. There was no getting any work out of that spot. And to make up for it, he was the biggest pig glutton of a dog I ever saw. On top of that, he was the cleverest thief, too. There was no circumventing him. Many a breakfast we went without our bacon, because Spot had been there first. And it was because of him that we nearly starved to death up the Stewart. See, he figured out the way to break into our meat cache. And what he didn't eat, the rest of the team did. But he was impartial. He stole from everybody. He was a restless dog, always very busy, snooping around or going somewhere, and there never was a campfire within 5 miles he didn't raid. The worst of it was that they always came back on us to pay his board bill, which was just, being the law of the land, but it was mighty hard on us, especially that first winter on the Chillicoot when we were busted, paying for whole hams and sides of bacon that we never ate. And he could fight, too, that Spot. He could do everything but work. He never pulled a pound, but he was the boss of the whole team. The way he made those dogs stand around was an education. He bullied them. And there was always one or more of them fresh marked with his fangs. But he was more than a bully. He wasn't afraid of anything that walked on 4 legs. And I've seen him march single-handed into a strange team without any provocation whatever and put the kibosh on the whole outfit. Did I say he could eat? I caught him eating the whip once. The whip. That's straight. He started in at the lash. And when I caught him, he was down to the handle and still going. But he was a good looker. At the end of the first week, we sold him for $75 to the mounted police. They had experienced dog drivers, and we knew by that time he'd covered the 600 miles to Dawson. He'd be a good sled dog. I say we knew, for we were just getting acquainted with that Spot. A little later, we were not brash enough to know anything where he was concerned. A week later, we woke up in the morning to the damnedest dog fight we'd ever heard. It was that Spot come back and knocking the team into shape. We had a pretty depressing breakfast, and I can tell you. But cheered up 2 hours afterward when we sold him to an official courier, bound into Dawson with government dispatches. That Spot was only 3 days in coming back, and, as usual, celebrated his arrival with a roughhouse. Yeah. We spent the winter and spring after our own outfit was across the pass, freighting other people's outfits, and we made a fat steak. Also, we made money out of Spot. If we sold him once, we sold him 20 times. He always came back and no one asked for their money. We didn't want the money. We'd have paid handsomely for anyone to take him off our hands for keeps. We had to get rid of him. We couldn't give him away, for that would have been suspicious. But he was such a fine looker that we never had any difficulty in selling him. Unbroke, we'd say, and they'd pay any old price for him. We sold him for as low as $25, and once we got $150 for him. That particular party returned him in person, refused to take their money back, and the way he abused us was something awful. He said it was cheap at the price to tell us what he thought of us, and we felt he was so justified that we never talked back. But to this day, I never quite regained all the old self-respect that was mine before that man talked to me. Yeah. When the ice cleared out of the lakes and river, we put our outfit in a Lake Bennett boat and started for Dawson. We had a good team of dogs, and of course we piled them on top of the outfit. That Spot was along. There was no losing him. And a dozen times, the first day, he knocked one or another of them dogs overboard in the course of fighting with them. It was close quarters, and he didn't like being crowded. What that dog needs is space, Steve said the second day. Let's maroon him. Well, we did. Running the boat in at Caribou Crossing for him to jump ashore, 2 of the other dogs, good dogs too, followed him. And we lost 2 whole days trying to find them. We never saw those 2 dogs again, but the quietness and relief we enjoyed made us decide, like the man who refused his $150, that it was cheap at the price. For the first time in months, Steve and I laughed and whistled and sang. We were as happy as clams. The dark days were over. The nightmare had been lifted. That Spot was gone. Three weeks later, one morning, Steve and I were standing on the riverbank at Dawson. A small boat was just arriving from Lake Bennett. I saw Steve give a start, and I heard him say something that was not nice, and that was not under his breath. Then I looked, and there, in the bow of the boat, with ears pricked up, sat Spot. Steve and I sneaked immediately like beaten curs, like cowards, like we was absconders from justice. It was this last that the lieutenant of police thought when he saw us sneaking. He surmised that there were law officers in the boat who was after us. He didn't wait to find out, but he kept us in sight. And in the M&M saloon, he got us into a corner. We had a merry time explaining, for we refused to go back to that boat and meet Spot. And finally, he held us under guard of another policeman while he went to the boat. After we got clear of him, we started for the cabin. And when we arrived, there was that Spot sitting on the stoop, waiting for us. Now, how did he know we lived there? There were 40,000 people in Dawson that summer. And how did he savvy our cabin out of all the cabins? How did he know we were in Dawson anyway? I leave it to you. But don't forget what I have said about his intelligence and that immortal something I seen glimmering in his eyes. Yeah. There was no getting rid of him no more. There were too many people in Dawson who had bought him on the Chillicoot, and the story got around. Half a dozen times we put him on board steamboats going down the Yukon, but he merely went ashore at the first landing and trotted back up the bank. We couldn't sell him. We couldn't kill him. You heard that. Both Steve and I tried. Nobody else was able to kill him. He just bore a charmed life. I've seen him go down in a dog fight in the main street with 50 dogs on top of him, and when they were separated, he'd appear on all his four legs, unharmed, while two of the dogs that had been on top of him would be laying dead. I saw him steal a chunk of moose meat from Major Dinwiddle's cache so heavy he could just keep one jump ahead of Mr. Dinwiddle's cook, who was after him with an axe. As he went up the hill after the cook gave out, Major Dinwiddle himself came out, pumped his Winchester into the landscape. He emptied his magazine twice, never touched that spot. Then a policeman came along and arrested him for discharging firearms inside the city limits. Major Dinwiddle paid his fine, and Steve and I paid him for the moose meat at the rate of $1 a pound. Bones and all, by the way, because that was what he had paid for it. Meat was high that year. Now, I'm only telling what I saw with my own eyes. And now I'll tell you something also. I saw that spot fall through a water hole. The ice was 3.5 feet thick, and the current sucked him under like a straw. 300 yards below was the big water hole used by the hospital. Spot crawled out of the hospital water hole, licked off the water, bit out the ice that had formed between his toes, trotted up the bank, and whipped a big Newfoundland belonging to the gold commissioner. In the fall of 1898, Steve and I poled up the Yukon on the last water bound for Stewart River. We took the dogs along, all except Spot. We figured we'd been feeding him long enough. He'd cost us more time and trouble and money and grub than we'd got by selling him on the Chillicoot, especially grub. So Steve and I tied him down in the cabin and pulled our own freight. We camped that night at the mouth of Indian River, Steve and I were pretty facetious over having shaken him. Steve was a funny cuss, and I was just sitting up in the blankets and laughing when a tornado hit camp. The way that Spot walked into them dogs and gave them what for was hair-raising. Now, how did he get to lose? Well, how did he get loose? I don't know. It's up to you. I haven't any theory. And how did he get across the Klondike River? That's another facer. And anyway, how did he know we had gone up the Yukon? See, we went by water, and he couldn't smell our tracks. Steve and I began to get superstitious about that dog. He got on our nerves, too. And between you and me, we were just a mite afraid of him. The freeze came on when we were at the mouth of Henderson Creek, and we traded him off for 2 sacks of flour to an outfit that was bound up White River after copper. Now, that whole outfit was lost. Never trace nor hide nor hair of men, dogs, sled, or anything was ever found. They dropped clean out of sight. It became one of the mysteries of the country. Steve and I plugged away up the Stewart, and 6 weeks afterward, that Spot crawled into camp. He was a perambulating skeleton and could just drag along. But he got there. And what I want to know is, who told him we were up the Stewart? We could have gone 1,000 other places. How did he know? You tell me, then I'll tell you. No losing him. At the Mayo, he started a row with an Indian dog. The buck who owned the dog took a swing at Spot with an axe, missed him, and killed his own dog. Talk about magic and turning bullets aside. I, for one, consider it a blamed sight harder to turn an axe aside with a big buck at the other end of it, and I saw him do it with my own eyes. That buck did not want to kill his own dog. You gotta show me. I don't know. I told you about Spot breaking into our meat cache. It was nearly the death of us. There wasn't any more meat to be killed, and meat was all we had to live on. The moose had gone back several hundred miles, and the Indians with them. There we were. Spring was on, and we had to wait for the river to break. We got pretty thin before we decided to eat the dogs. But we decided to eat Spot first. You know what that dog did? He sneaked. Now, how did he know our minds were made up to eat him? Or any of them? We sat up nights laying for him, but he never came back. And we ate the other dogs. Eventually, we ate the whole team. And now for the sequel. You know what it is when a big river breaks up and a few billion tons of ice go out, jamming and milling and grinding. Just in the thick of it, when the Stewart went out, rumbling and roaring, we sighted Spot out in the middle. He got caught as he was trying to cross up above somewhere. Steve and I yelled and shouted and ran up down the bank, tossing our hats in the air. Sometimes we'd stop and hug each other. We were that boisterous because we were about to see Spot's finish. He didn't have a chance in a million. He didn't have any chance at all. After the ice run, we got into a canoe and paddled down to the Yukon and down the Yukon to Dawson, stopping to feed up for a week at the cabins at the mouth of Henderson Creek. And as we came into the bank of Dawson, there sat that Spot, waiting for us. His ears pricked up, his tail wagging, his mouth smiling, extending this hearty welcome to us. Now, how did he get out of that ice? How did he know we were coming to Dawson, to the very hour and minute to be out there on the bank waiting for us? The more I think of that Spot, the more I am convinced that there are things in this world that go beyond science. On no scientific grounds can that Spot be explained. It's psychic phenomena or mysticism or something of that sort, I guess, with a lot of theosophy thrown in. The Klondike is a good country. I might have been there yet and become a millionaire. If it hadn't been for Spot, he got on my nerves. I stood him for 2 years altogether. And then I guess my stamina just broke. It was the summer of 1899 when I pulled out. I didn't say anything to Steve. I just sneaked. But I fixed it up all right. I wrote Steve a note and enclosed a package of rough-on rats, telling him what to do with it. I was worn down to the skin and bone by that Spot, and I was nervous that I'd jump and look around when there wasn't anybody hailing distance, but it was astonishing the way I recuperated when I got rid of him. I got back 20 pounds before I arrived in San Francisco, and by the time I'd crossed the ferry to Oakland, I was my old self again. So that even my wife looked at vain for any change in me. Steve wrote to me once. His letter seemed irritated. He took it kind of hard, 'cause I'd left him with Spot. Also, he said he'd used the rough-on rats per directions, and that there was nothing doing. A year went by. I was back in the office and prospering in all ways, even getting a bit fat. And then Steve arrived. He didn't look me up. I read his name in the steamer list, and I wondered why. But I didn't wonder long. I got up one morning and found that Spot chained to the gatepost, holding up the milkman. Steve went north to Seattle, I learned that very morning. I didn't put on any more weight. My wife made me buy him a collar and a tag. And within an hour, he showed his gratitude by killing her pet Persian cat. It's a Persian. It's okay. There's just no getting rid of that Spot. He'll be with me until I die, for he will never die. My appetite, not so good since he arrived, and my wife says I'm looking a bit peaked. Last night, that Spot got into Mr. Harvey's hen house. Harvey's my next door neighbor. And killed 19 of his fancy-bred pigeons. I shall have to pay for them. My neighbors on the other side quarreled with my wife and then moved out. Spot was the cause of it. And that is why I'm disappointed in Stephen McKay. I had no idea he was such a mean man. This is a scene edited out of Romeo and Juliet. In this scene, Romeo and Juliet have met, and they now know both who the other one is. And if you're not familiar with the play, if you're not familiar with the backdrop, this is, of course, what West Side Story was borrowed from. These are two teenagers that are just desperately in love, but come from two opposing households, both alike in dignity and in greatness. But in Renaissance Italy, they might as well be warring street gangs. Their cousins are constantly fighting with each other, sometimes even killing each other. And in this particular scene, Romeo, if she wasn't attracted to him, it would be creepy. I'll put it that way. In this particular scene, Romeo has happened upon her balcony. He's not on the balcony, he's underneath the balcony, but he's walking around on her family's grounds. And that would be really, really, really bad, because if he were to be caught and recognized, they'd kill him. I mean, it's pretty unambiguous. If the Capulets saw a Montague on their property at night, they wouldn't be calling the police. There would be no investigation. They would just kill him and deal with the impact of that later. So it's a life or death big deal for him to be creeping around the Montague compound. But for him, it's one of those stupid teenage things that you just do anyway, regardless what a stupid idea it is. I don't believe at the beginning of this he actually knows like what room is hers, but he discovers that at the very opening of this scene. This is Romeo and Juliet, Act 2, Scene 2, Capulet's Orchard. But soft. What light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon. It's my lady. Oh, it is my love. Oh, that she knew I were here. Oh, she speaks, yet she says nothing. What of that? I'm too bold. 'Tis not to me she speaks. Through the fairest stars in all the heaven, having some business, do entreat her eyes to twinkle in their spheres till they return. What if her eyes were there? They in her head, the brightness of her cheek would shame those stars as daylight doth a lamp. Her eyes in heaven would through the airy region stream so bright that birds would sing and think it were not night. See how she leans her cheek upon her hand. Oh, that I were a glove upon that hand, that I might touch that cheek. She speaks. Oh, speak again, bright angel, for thou art as glorious to this night being o'er my head as a winged messenger when he bestrides the lazy, pacing clouds and sails upon the bosom of the air. Romeo, oh Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Deny thy father and refuse thy name, or if thou wilt, be but sworn my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet. Shall I hear more, or shall I speak at this? 'Tis but thy name that is my enemy. Thou art thyself, though not a Montague. What's a Montague? It is nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, nor any other part belonging to a man, albeit some other name. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, so Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, retain that dear perfection which he owns without that title. Romeo doff thy name, and for that name which is no part of thee, take all of myself. I take thee at thy word. Call me but love, and I'll be new baptized. Henceforth, I never will be Romeo. What man art thou, thus bescreened in night, so stumblest on my counsel? By a name, I know not how to tell thee who I am. My name, dear saint, is hateful to myself, because it is an enemy to thee. Had I it written, I would tear the word. My ears have not drunk 100 words of that tongue's utterance, yet I know the sound. Art thou not Romeo and a Montague? Neither, fair saint, if either thee dislike. How canst thou hither? Tell me, and wherefore? The orchard walls are high and hard to climb, and the place death, considering who thou art, if any of my kinsmen find thee here. With love's light wings did I o'erperch the walls, for stony limits cannot hold love out, and what love can do that dares love attempt. Therefore thy kinsmen are no let to me. If they do see thee here, they will murder thee. Alack, there lies more peril in thine eyes than in 20 of their swords. I would not for the world they saw thee here. I have night's cloak to hide me from their sight. And but thou love me, let them find me here. My life were better ended by their hate than ended by wanting of thy love. By whose direction foundst thou this place? By love, that first did prompt me to inquire. He lent me counsel, and I lent him eyes. Thou knowest the mask of night is on my face, else would a maiden blush be paint my cheek, for that which thou hast heard me speak tonight. Dost thou love me? I know thou wilt say aye, and I will take thy word, yet if thou swearest, thou may prove false. O gentle Romeo, if thou dost love, pronounce it faithfully, or if thou thinkest I am too quickly won, I'll frown and be perverse and say thee nay. In truth, fair Montague, I am too fond, and therefore thou mayst think my behavior light, but that thou overheardst ere I was ware, my true love passion. Therefore pardon me, and not impute this yielding to light love which the dark night hath so discovered. Lady, by yonder blessed moon, I swear that tips with silver all these fruit treetops. Oh, swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon that monthly changes in her circled orb, lest thy love prove likewise variable. What shall I swear by? Do not swear at all. Or if thou wilt, swear by thy gracious self, which is the god of my idolatry, and I'll believe thee. If my heart's dear love... Well, do not swear. Although I joy in thee, I have no joy of this contract tonight. It is too rash, it's too unadvised, too sudden. This bud of love by summer's ripening breath might prove a beauteous flower when next we meet. Good night, good night. As sweet repose and rest come to thy heart as that within my breast. Oh, wilt thou leave me so unsatisfied? What satisfaction canst thou have tonight? The exchange of thy love's faithful vow for mine. I gave thee mine before thou did request it, and yet I would it were to give again. Wouldst thou withdraw it? For what purpose, love? But to be frank, and give it thee again. And yet, I wish but for the thing I have. My bounty is as boundless as the sea. My love is deep. The more I give to thee, the more I have, for both are infinite. I hear some noise within. Dear love, adieu. Sweet Montague, be true. Stay but a little. I will come again. Oh, blessed night, I am afeard. I am afeard being in night, all this is but a dream. Too flattering, sweet to be substantial. 3 words, dear Romeo, and good night indeed. If that thy bent of love be honorable, thy purpose marriage, send me word tomorrow by one that I'll procure to come to thee. Where and what time that will perform the rite, and all my fortunes at thy foot I'll lay, and follow thee, my lord, throughout the world. I come, anon, sweet nurse, anon. But if thou meanst not well, I do beseech thee to cease thy suit and leave me to my grief 1,000 times. Good night. 1,000 times the worse to want thy light. Love goes toward love as schoolboys from their books, but love from love toward school with heavy looks. Hist, Romeo, hist. Oh, for a falconer's voice to lure this flying hawk back again, for then I would tear the cave where Echo lies and make her airy tongue more hoarse than mine with repetition of my Romeo's name. Romeo. It is my soul that calls upon my name. How silver sweet sound lovers' tongues by night, like softest music to attending ears. Romeo, my dear, at what o'clock tomorrow shall I send to thee? By the hour of 9. I will not fail. 'Tis 20 years till then. I forgot why I did call thee back. Let me stand here till thou do remember it. I shall forget to have thee stand still there, remembering how I love thy company. And I'll still stay, to have thee still forgetting any other home but this. 'Tis almost morning. I would have thee gone. And yet no farther than a wanton's bird that lets it hop a little from her hand like a poor prisoner in his twisted gyves with a silk thread plucks it back again, so loving jealous of his liberty. I would I were thy bird. Sweet, so would I. Yet I should kill thee with much cherishing. Good night, good night. Parting is such sweet sorrow that I shall say good night till it be morrow. Sleep dwell upon thine eyes, peace in thy breast. Would I were sleep and peace, so sweet to rest. Hence will I go to my ghostly father's cell to help crave and my dear hap to tell. In 1871, Lewis Carroll wrote or published Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There. This was the sequel to Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, 1865. I think subsequent editions of Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There, I think subsequent editions were edited down in title to just be called Through the Looking Glass. This poem is, of course, from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. This is Jabberwocky. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogroves, and the mumraths outgrabe. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the claws that catch, the jaws that bite. Beware the Jubjub bird, and shun the frumious Bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand. Long time the manxome foe he sought. So rested he by the tum-trum tree, and stood a while in thought. And as in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock, with eyes of flame, came whiffling through the tulgey wood, and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went glumphing back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Oh, come to my arms, my beamish boy, oh, frabjous day, Calloo, Calais, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogroves, and the mumraths outgrabe. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Fireside Tales with Wolfgang. To view more of my work, check out my YouTube channel at Hunter's Acoustic Cabin. Directed by Hunter Ackerman. Endorsed by Wolfgang Beastly. Produced by GWC Productions. Originally broadcast on GWC Productions' YouTube channel, CAPS Media Television Channel 6, KPPQ LP Ventura at 104.1 FM, and on the KPPQ Podcast Network.